Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest in the ADGM webcast series 2020. Welcome to all of those of you who are watching this either via our website, through LinkedIn, on YouTube, or via Twitter. Please, as in previous sessions, be aware that we've received questions in advance from many of you, and thank you for that. But you can also submit questions to this panel live as well through your chosen platform. Today, we continue the webcast series with a focus on family offices and foundations. This, unfortunately, was rescheduled from the session that we had planned for last week due to technical difficulties. And really, I wanted to make sure that we did reschedule this and reschedule it quickly. We've had a great sign up for this webinar, and we have a great panel of speakers. I want to make sure that you get the full benefit from that panel today. We have an external panel of speakers from the advisory community, our colleagues from Ernst & Young, both here in the Middle East region and also in India, and from MHQ, one of our leading law and structuring firms here in the region. We also have two of our leading private bankers from the region, both from Mirabeau and from ADCB, and I'll be introducing each of the speakers as we go through this session. I just wanted to say a few words from an ADGM perspective about why this webinar in particular is so important to us. For me, family offices are arguably the fastest growing investment vehicles in the world today. They're something that we're seeing growing very strongly in this region and are very unique to each family. In many cases, they constitute a centralized function which enables families to manage wealth across the family and also to manage the structure of their business interests. There is no single structure which forms a family office. They can be very complex and incredibly bespoke. While some jurisdictions have provided specific regulations around family offices, in ADGM, we've done something rather different. We've provided a holistic platform with a wide range of regulations, a wide range of vehicles, and a wide range of structures, which enables families with their advisors to structure the types of solutions which best meet the needs of their family. So with that in mind, I'd like to move straight on to our first panelist today, Ismail Hajar, who is the MENA private leader for EY, who will talk us through what a family office is and what family offices do. Ismail.
Very good morning to you all. I hope you can hear me well today. And indeed, as Steve mentioned, he asked me to answer two questions for you today. The first question is, what is a family office? And the second question is, what does a family office do and what makes it so special? So let's start with the first question. I have a personal definition that I share with my clients as to what is a family office. And I always compare a family office to a business. But a business whose sole clients are members of one single family or multiple families, depending on the purpose of the family office, and a business which operates as per a very particular menu of services that is determined by the needs, requirements, and wishes of one family or multiple families, as I said before. So in practice, how does it look like? You have 3 or 4 types of family offices. The first type of family office is the one that is the most common in the Middle East region. That is the embedded family office. It means that the family office is invisible towards the outside world because it is embedded, nested in the family business. It also means that the embedded family office is relying on resources, talent, which belong to the business, which can be good to kick off the family office, but in the long term, which is generally a source of issues and conflict of interest. The second type of family office is the single family office, which is the natural evolution once the family has matured sufficiently, once the family is ready to take the family office functions outside of the business to pool these functions within a legal entity segregated from the business, whose sole purpose is to activate the menu of services. Single family office, you can find that in the ADGM, right? While, as I said before, the embedded family office, you could find them everywhere, right, where the family business legal entity is set up. The third type of family office is the multifamily office, which is comparable to the single family office, but acts for the benefit of multiple families. And there are many different shades of multifamily office. You have the multifamily office that operates, for one family and let's say two other families that are friends of family one, or you have the purely commercial multifamily office, which, almost act as a mini bank, right, with a bespoke menu of services, but a commercial intent, while the multifamily office serving, let's say, family and friends would typically, let's say, have less of a commercial intent and could, for instance, act as a cost center. The fourth type of family office that is not mentioned on this slide is the virtual family office. And we see a lot of families starting with a virtual family office if they don't have a family office embedded in the business, and then moving on to a single family office or to possibly a multi-family office in due course. Creating a family office takes time. It's a process, and therefore, switching from nothing to a single family office may not be for everyone. And that's where you see embedded family office and virtual family office being very useful as an intermediary step in the process. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So we often hear that every family office is different and that it's very difficult to put them in a box. I agree with that. But what makes them so different? Well, the answer was provided already in the other slide. Each family office operates according to a menu of services that is bespoke to the family needs, wishes, and requirements. And as you can guess, each family has different needs, wishes, and requirements. At EY, we have developed a methodology to support families with the design of bespoke menu of services. We named our approach Family Office Leading Practices, as it was developed based on interactions over the years with hundreds of family offices around the globe. While each family office may be unique, there are trends in the services being provided by them. And typically, we see 4 areas, which are mentioned in the slide, being handled by most family office. The first one is supervision, monitoring, and aggregation of portfolio. The second one is financial management. The third one is tax and legal optimization. Not that the family office should do everything itself, but coordinating it with leading lawyers, consultants, and advisors, and providing some sort of second opinion if they have the resources internally. And the fourth one is the management of the wealth transfer. That's a very broad concept, managing the wealth transfer, and that can typically include family governance, but also many other potential services. And in the interest of time, we're not going to go into details about each specific service that could be embedded within these 4 themes or trends. And however, would be happy to answer questions and go into more details during the Q&A session. Let's move back to Steve for now.
Thank you, Ismail. That's a great overview of what a family office is and what a family office can do. And as you mentioned, there's a wide range of different services that can be provided and a wide range of different flavors in which family offices can exist. We had badged this session around family offices and foundations, foundations being one of the tools that we've seen be most attractive to a number of families in this region, something we introduced in ADGM a few years ago now. To talk a little bit more about foundations and how those can be used, I'd like to bring on my second panelist, Jan Mrazek, Managing Partner of MHQ. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve, and good morning, everyone. You talked about, Ismail and yourself, about legacy, about the family going from one generation to the other. And of course, having a vision is important. Of course, having some governance is important. Of course, having the right people around you to advise you either in-house or out is important. But I would actually make the statement that the structure or infrastructure is paramount. And until now, many leading families here in the Gulf had very little to do. They could consolidate assets using companies. They often had trust abroad, but it was very, very challenging to have companies, foreign trusts, use that here compatible with the local assets. Now, this is where ADGM came in 3 years ago by implementing a foundation regime, which ever since has been growing at a rapid pace across the market. We anticipate that this year there will be 100 foundations registered here in the Gulf. This number will triple next year. So perhaps time to get acquainted with your new friend. So what is a foundation? A foundation is like a company. It is registered with the ADGM. It has a charter and bylaws, which are similar to memorandum and article of association. It is controlled by directors. They are called council members. So in all of this, it's something very familiar to the entrepreneur like we know it today. But it has one key difference with a company is that it does not have shares. So it's like a balloon that floats around in perpetuity and enables to hold these assets, be controlled by the family, and move from one generation to the others without any impact of creditor attacks, family feud, or someone passing away, a succession plan. Importantly, in a region where a lot of the wealth is still held and controlled by families, the patriarch and his family members can have and can maintain operational control over this holding structure. And perhaps more importantly, foundations are compatible with domestic assets. You can see it here. This is a title deed. A foundation can hold real estate, whether in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, no problem. These assets can be financed, refinanced. These assets can be held directly or indirectly. All this is proven, it works, and it is implemented by a number of families, whether for freehold or for assets that are limited to GCC or down the road in Abu Dhabi to UAE family members. So this is possible, and it has already been tested by both land departments that matter in this region. It also works for companies. You can see on the slide that is coming your way that shares in the ADGM can be held by a foundation, but it's not only in the ADGM. UAE Mainland LLC, where most of the bloodstream of this country comes from, where all the enterprises are, this can be structured through an ADGM holding entity. This can be structured directly under an ADGM foundation. But perhaps more importantly, what you can do with that is work both for Muslims and non-Muslims. When you structure a foundation, you effectively provide a lifetime gift to that structure. And by documenting the intent of the founder, you create something which is perfectly compatible with the law of the land. It is permissible under Sharia to do a lifetime gift. It is perfectly fine under Sharia to plan, providing this remains fair for the family at large and heirs. And do not trust me on that. Trust the local Awqaf authorities, because it is possible for a Muslim family to seek a fatwa, effectively an opinion, from the domestic authorities, which will review the structure that you plan to implement as a Muslim and to sign off on this being compatible. This was submitted to the Awqaf authorities for an ADGM foundation. It was for a prominent entrepreneurial family. And what it said is that during his lifetime, the patriarch could remain the first beneficiary of the foundation. And after him, his daughter and son could benefit equally. This is revolutionary. This means that the local authorities are perfectly fine with structuring being done through the ADGM for both Muslims and non-Muslims, and thereby ensuring implementation over generation. So if we come back to how a family structure 2.0 should look like, this is the next slide, then you will see that all these assets, these valuable assets, these asset generating tools, being business, real estate, financial asset, can all be consolidated and pooled in a common law framework in the ADGM and ultimately held by a foundation that can be controlled by the family. The assets can be from every type, every asset class, including real estate that is limited to UAE nationals. This has been proven. And then you can implement your SFO in there as a management tool of all of this. And I look forward discussing the tool with my fellow panelists. Steve, back to you.
Thank you, Jan. Some great insights there, and really important that you picked up on some of the questions that were answered, that were asked to us before this session started as well. So thank you to everybody that sent us in questions ahead of the session. And please, just to remind you that you can send questions into us using the various different platforms through which you're watching this webinar. So having taken a walk through the structures of what a family office is, what a family office can do, and how we can use foundations as a core component of that succession management, I'd like to take a step out and think about how our private banking colleagues are able to support and their views on family offices. Delighted to be joined by one of our leading private bankers in the region, Alain Baron, from Mirabeau Group. Alain.
Good morning, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for my fellow panelists that have complemented our view as well on family office and how Mirabeau view the family offices and what would be our advice to clients wishing to set up family offices. We view a family office as it's a setup and the building blocks and continuation of a family legacy. After years of success, families would like to create a platform that complements and diversifies the source of their income away from the core of business in order to shape the roadmap for the next generation. Our experience in the GCC taught us that successful and long-lasting family offices transcend from the traditional patriarch mode, where all the matters are run by one single leader, to accepting the concept of a family office. In the patriarch mode, all major decisions are taken by the head of the family, whether it is a business, personal asset, or a family repartition and remuneration. What we have experienced so far is that 20 to 30% of GCC families have implemented a family office with the right governance and culture. As an example, Mirabeau Bank evolved from a small merchant bank to a private family organization, having wealth management as their core business. This has enabled them to continue the family legacy and journey for the past 200 years. Now let's discuss the 4 core points that we believe are essential to implement such philosophy. We can start with building the constitution. A family constitution must be written as a body of fundamental principles and precedents to which a family office adheres by. This constitution should contain policies, guiding visions and values that regulate members' relationship with the business, as well as pave the way to set up the family charter and family governance. These 2 points are very important for the Constitution. The family governance will serve as the structure, the set of rules and processes to facilitate communication between family members. It will contain principles that will identify the distribution of rights and responsibilities among the participants of the family and how they relate to each other. Now, the family charter will continue and will contain the goals and aspiration of the family for the current and the future generation. It outlines how each family member can work together and how they should engage and approach decisions across the board. We believe this combination of those 2 points will create the infrastructure for all family-related matters, ranging from business affairs to support for family members, as well as the protection of wealth, which is the most important aspect. Now, when drafting the above, it is very crucial to consider the culture, the family heritage, and the beliefs. What is equal as important, considering the geopolitical landscape in each region, is very necessary to create an adequate environment to sustain and grow the family office. We thus consider you, Steve, the UAE, and particularly the ADGM as an adequate jurisdiction. The second point would be the execution of this fundamental constitution. Once we have the infrastructure set up, the implementation of an independent ecosystem should follow. Like my fellow Ismail mentioned, here we are referring to an independent team of world-class legal and structuring professionals chosen by us through our long-lasting relationship and delivering of success. MHQ is one of these people that we work with for the past 14 years in the region. Those experts will be responsible for guiding the family members to ensure that the objectives and strategic decisions are executed in line with the family mission, with special consideration to their culture, their business, and their traditions. Those professionals should opine on asset protection by managing political risk, litigation risk, as well as exposure to creditors. Confidentiality is a very important point, and exchange of information protocols. Succession by facilitating smooth transfer of wealth between the first, the second, the third, and ongoing generations. Taxes via efficient structure to mitigate the effects of taxes in invested countries. Following the selection of such individuals, we advise family to focus on the investing and guidance aspect. Let's elaborate more on this third point. We believe that the investment guidance should include asset management expertise. It is very important, with a bespoke approach where families can access a global suite of solutions customized to their objectives and business philosophy. As a general rule, traditional asset class offering stocks, bonds, funds should be complemented with access to direct and alternative investment for families seeking diversified ways of managing their assets. We are currently witnessing great interest from the GCC families, our clients, in a robust end-to-end private asset programs. This appetite to participate in a blend of private equity opportunities has been greatly welcomed lately. To provide our audience with some context, Mirabeau has been actively helping families to participate in large world-class and exclusive transactions, and more specifically in real estate worldwide. Mirabeau's approach to investing should incorporate a family's belief and environmentally conscious initiatives. As a testament to those shared values, we have partnered recently with a family of experts to help shape the future of consumption in the fashion and luxury space centered around ESG, impact, and sustainability. Fourth and last point to explore is the support and the follow-up in the journey and the legacy of a family. Our ever-changing geopolitical and macroeconomic landscape requires any human organization to be agile and act in prompt manner, which is why Mirabeau offers a family office service to guide our clientele and help them to navigate in the current landscape. Our families will have access to multidisciplinary committee and board of governance from Mirabeau and its independent ecosystem. The committee will provide economic and strategic insight that are considered essential to the family. The ecosystem will take charge of the areas previously mentioned, such as consolidation, protection, and succession of wealth. Thank you so much. Back to you, Steve, and I will be more than pleasure to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Alain. Thank you for those insightful thoughts. I think you've actually answered one of the questions that we've had coming through live from Nadeem, who asked about whether we see family offices investing into mid-sized SME businesses. And you talked about the private equity side of what we're seeing forming part of that investment strategy of family offices. So thank you for covering that, and maybe we'll revisit that a little later if we have time. For my next panelist, it's Mark Peters from who is the Senior Executive Officer of ADCB Asset Management. Mark has been a great friend of ADGM and has played a wonderful role in building a private banking capability within one of our largest banks. So Mark, maybe you can give us some of your perspective on what we're seeing around family offices and foundations.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you for the opportunity. As has been mentioned by a number of folks, the number of family offices that we deal with is quite large. And I can say while they share a lot of the same desired outcomes, certainly because of the family needs, there are a lot of idiosyncrasies in the way they operate. But there certainly are best practices that any of them can learn from each other, as well as learn from folks like ourselves and the other panelists. With regards to multifamily offices, there's a far fewer number in the region. I'm fortunate in that just over a decade ago, the second largest multifamily office in the United States reported to me. And so I've seen a large amount of what goes on the inside of multifamily offices. And then with regards to foundations, I think I would hearken back to 5.5 years ago when we really first established our original and preliminary dialogue with all of the folks at ADGM. And we came to the very, I think, strong conclusion that ADGM was going to be, and certainly is today, a leader in providing both the platform and the structures that families need for the region. And so we fully embrace that platform of capabilities and structures, and we try to offer those, our insights, as well as kind of the deep knowledge of all of the things that go on within ADGM because of our long history. As Steve mentioned, both our asset management business and our private banking business are co-located together in Al Sila Tower in ADGM. And with regards to a question that was asked by John Mark, I think where the rubber really meets the road, we've talked a lot about kind of what the structural structures look like and what family needs might be incorporated in the structures. But as I'm fond of saying, after now 4 decades being in the wealth and private banking and asset management world, where the rubber really meets the road with structures is in the bankability. And we help families, family offices, use foundations as well as other structures to actually execute not only their wealth and asset management needs, but also because we're a large commercial bank, the banking and lending requirements they have. And so I think that that's kind of a key thing to keep in mind. ADGM is certainly well recognized, and the structures that are formed in ADGM, specifically the foundations, are well regarded in other jurisdictions. And so that key piece of bankability is, I think, really important. And with that brief overview, Steve, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for picking up the questions as we go through. And thank you to those that are submitting them live. Please continue to do so. I can see them coming up, and when we get into Q&A in a few minutes, I'll certainly pick up the ones that we haven't addressed on the way through here. My next panelist is Katie Chandy, who's co-leader of a private services practice for EY in India. Now, some of you will have joined us for our Indian private clients webinar a little earlier in this series, which was extremely successful and gave some great insights into what's happening here. Our aim has always been to create a private wealth and private banking hub here in ADGM for not just UAE and not just the GCC, but for a much wider region as well. And so it's with great pleasure that I welcome Chandy to the call today, and look forward to your insights on what's happening within the Indian market and how the family office and foundations consumption is developing within that marketplace. Chandy.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning to everybody. So as my panelists have spoken a lot about family offices, the foundation structure, let me just give you a perspective of what's happening in India, and the explosive growth of wealth in the last 10 years, and how families are looking at multiple, they have multiple objectives in mind. The first is, we are so focused on our existing businesses. How do we reduce risks? How do we diversify opportunities? And there's so much happening in India. How do we invest in startups? How do we invest in overseas assets? How do we invest in overseas stocks? So on and so forth. So this concept of family office has been growing, and there is an explosive growth of family offices. Quite a few of them are structured within the entrepreneur's business vertical itself. But of late, we are seeing that people have come to recognize that the need for a specialized skill and a skill that can bring to bear relationships across the globe, to be able to manage wealth appropriately. So family offices, we are seeing a great uptick in. We are seeing professionals get into the space. We are seeing a porosity of ideas across borders. It is also led to multiple family offices, and as you know, Indians are quite quite open to moves between jurisdictions. So there are families spread across the globe, and multiple family offices, if you may, are coming into play and into the scheme of things. Along with that, there is this this historic fear of how will succession pan out. And there are multiple studies that EY has done on, will wealth last more than 3 generations? What is the percentage of businesses that last 3 generations, so on and so forth. And the main reason for all of this is the conflicts that can arise between or within the family if clarity of thought on how to take the business forward and who will take the business forward and how will they each share in the responsibilities, obligations, and the wealth that is created. So we are seeing succession planning come about in a big way. We are seeing the trust structure. The trust structure is the most commonly adopted structure in India. But with ideas across the globe, the foundation is also gaining attention. One has to get comfortable. A lot of the entrepreneurs are still thinking about trust because everyone they know is thinking about trust. But the foundation is a topic that has gathered momentum. We'll have to see how that goes forward and gets implemented. We are also seeing inheritance tax that was abolished in India in the 80s being talked of, and the potential of that coming back into play. And therefore, the trust, the foundation, the inheritance tax planning, these are getting weaved into one. So succession and inheritance tax is becoming one topic. And for Indians with wealth across jurisdictions, it's important to manage inheritance laws in other jurisdictions and in India. India also has exchange control regulations which govern how much wealth can be taken out or how much money can cross borders on a capital account transaction. So therefore, if there are family members outside and even if they inherit assets in India, how much can they take out? So all of this is becoming complex. All of this has caught the attention of the promoters, of the patriarchs, and we are seeing a great level of traction in the whole family office, and then the succession planning, inheritance tax, global wealth creation, and therefore the increased coordination between jurisdictions. And as we are live with ADGM, and there's a huge diaspora of Indians in the Middle East, in MENA, and how can we all work together? So that's a broad perspective about India. Happy to pick up specific questions. And back to you, Steve.
First, let me thank Chandy for that. Some really key points coming out there in terms of the tragedy of the wasted wealth where we see transition into generations and the steps that people are taking to avoid that. We've seen a number of Indian families who've established trusts in ADGM and use structures here as well. So just to re-emphasize that the suite of services that are being provided are much wider than just the foundations, albeit that we focused on that today. So thank you to all the panelists. We've got a number of questions that are coming in from the audience already, and I want to try and start with a couple of those. The first one picks up on a point that was discussed a little earlier on, where we talked about the comparison between emerging jurisdictions like ADGM and established jurisdictions around the world, and whether we're seeing one overwhelming the other or whether we're seeing them being used in conjunction with each other. And Jan, maybe I can start with you and ask you what you're seeing in terms of the way that families are structuring across multiple jurisdictions, or whether they're favoring one or another.
I think the emerging trend today is that families, one, want to have more control. So they get educated on the tool, get a seat on board, and go and handpick the best advisors around, but they want to be in control. It's no longer, I will trust you, you do it, I do not want to hear about it. The second thing is, we also see increasingly not one jurisdiction being used, but several, often two, sometimes three. And this can be done remotely, digitally, by, say, an old world structure, perhaps in Singapore or UK or the US or Switzerland, linked to something that would be closer to home here. And the reason for that is that often multi-cross-border structures are very inefficient. The world is full of regulation and they do not like cross-border, whereas you can have something here in a tier 1 financial center, common law denominated, managed by the family and compatible with domestic assets, and some sort of other office in a place that the family enjoys going to, but that also has the capability of managing often foreign-based assets. So this is what we see in practice a lot, family taking control and doing it both in parallel.
Thank you. Ismail, your perspective on that? Are you also seeing that within EY?
Absolutely. I think the time when families would marry with one single jurisdiction is over, because the world has become so complex. You have so many things to take into consideration that didn't exist before. And at the end of the day, you don't want to put all your eggs in the same basket, even if the basket is very, very strong. And so from a structuring perspective, we see the same as that Jan described. So we see ADGM being used for the regional assets. We see other jurisdictions being used for international assets, and we see the two being connected somehow through control or common control that could be done through a legal entity, incorporated in a third jurisdiction or in one of the two jurisdictions. From a family office perspective, we also see more than one jurisdiction being adopted, and that has very much to do with the menu of services of the family office. And broadly, the services can be split into two: services that requires close physical connection to the family, which can be, concierge, personal management of the real estate, but also maybe management of, the local or regional assets. All of that requires a certain level of proximity with the family. And then the services which don't, which typically would be in relation to the international portfolio, international real estate, and so on and so forth. And so we have created over the past 24 months a number of dual head structures where one head is within the region, for instance, in the ADGM, and the other head is outside of the region, and they somehow interact with each other, although from a data protection perspective, privacy confidentiality, there is generally a very clear segregation between left and right.
Absolutely, and that data privacy is something that we all take extremely seriously, I think, and some of the discrete vehicle structures that have been created can reinforce that, but it's much deeper than just the way the vehicles are constructed. I know. Mark, from your client's perspective, are you also seeing this trend with multi-jurisdictions?
Yes, absolutely, Steve. And just to echo something that Ismail alluded to, and just to add a dose of kind of the reality of that we're all facing today, I think you want to make sure that that the structure that you're using is appropriate for the jurisdiction. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. We're probably 6 or 7 or 8 months into a series of inquiries on a structure that's being used here locally that's domiciled in the Cayman Islands. Going back and forth to get which is a well-established jurisdiction. Many large institutional funds in the Western Hemisphere use the Cayman Islands. And I don't mean to disparage the Cayman Islands, but I do mean to point out for folks that are listening to this, that in terms of being facile and responding to kind of what everyone understands is an increasing scrutiny around compliance globally, that you need to be very careful in matching the needs that you have and how you're going to use the structure that you're going to have. And this is one of the reasons that we believe ADGM foundations are so appropriate, particularly probably for the folks watching this. So just a little bit of a dose of reality, if you will.
Yeah, thank you. It's always good to come on to that. Alan, can I come to you next, please? I want to pick up on something that you mentioned during your presentation. You talked about the investment guidance that is so important for families. We've had a couple of questions coming through about how the local economies are continuing to diversify, and questions about how that plays out in terms of what we see in family wealth. I know you talked about a range of different asset classes, but perhaps you can say a little bit more about the move away from traditional asset holdings like real estate.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Steve. It's a new wave today, and it's a new philosophy that the clientele are shifting from the traditional to non-traditional investment, and especially in the family office and the family businesses. Today, we are feeling that clients are going towards direct investments themselves through club deals, through structures with a small and limited number of investors. Basically, what we have seen for the past 2 to 3 years, we incorporated last year a new vision about investing directly for our investors in the real estate. Specifically, we started in the United States, of course, going to Europe. And today, the approach is very simple. We gather around the table a number of 6 to 10 families or 6 to 10 clientele, where we structure for them a vehicle in Luxembourg, because this is the best jurisdiction today for Middle Eastern client to be investing outside. And through this vehicle in Europe, through Luxembourg, we go and invest in the USA, of course, by creating a second vehicle for them. So basically, this kind of structuring will avoid all kind of taxes for our Middle Eastern clients. Second, when we get to see or to find or to search for an investment opportunity, we put the guidelines or the points of our core investment, which is first, we need one of the most renowned cities in the United States. Second, what we call it state-of-the-art building. Third, and the most important point, is an investment-grade tenant from A and above. Fourth, we need to identify the lease agreement, of course. We look always for unbreakable lease agreement with a minimum term of 12 years and above. And the last important thing is the income. We are aiming always for our GCC clientele an income net of taxes between 6 and 8%, depending on the asset and on the tenant. So these kind of investment today has really a large impact on our GCC clients. And this is why we have built our real estate portfolio of direct investments. Of course, we blend such kind of strategy with other strategies, like we have done in France, in particular, when we blended the private equity with the real estate. We did another fund of private equity where we take part of the huge transformation of Paris called the Grand Paris, to reform the whole infrastructure of Paris, where you can blend the private equity with the real estate. So such innovation in investment is very demanding today for families. And of course, as I mentioned during my 10 minutes interpretation, we need to build an ecosystem. We need to bring the experts on board, and more specifically to deal with the best in class in our sector. We need to bring these independent people and gather all together this strategy in order, at the end of the day, to come up with the best solution ever today we can offer for our clientele. So this independent ecosystem is very important to decide and to shift our clients from the traditional to direct investment and non-traditional investments.
And I think it's really important for those places, and we're blessed to be one of those places with strong founders and strong family offices, that those families are able to take advantage, perhaps in a more dynamic and more responsive way, to market opportunities as they arise than the institutional investors, where the decision-making processes can be a little slower, I guess. Thank you for that. Candy, can I come to you? You talked about succession planning and intergenerational wealth management, which of course is absolutely part of what we're talking about here. I'm interested to see if there are any trends that you're seeing emerging in India, and maybe the others can comment about the Middle Eastern region as well, in terms of push towards formalizing some of these structures here for intergenerational wealth management and succession planning, particularly, I guess, given that with the unfortunate rise of COVID, we are seeing people who recognize their mortality perhaps more than they have in the past.
Thank you, Steve. I think, so, if you were to look at succession planning, it's not a new topic to any of us or to any of the entrepreneurs, but it is the most difficult topic for an entrepreneur to step back and to think. It's a time when an advisor can lob the ball back and the entrepreneur can squirm, because when you start asking questions on who will you move this asset to or that asset to, how do you want, who will be the CEO when you're not around, and so on and so forth. So this has been a topic that has been relevant. There have been the few promoters who have picked it up in the past. But the COVID distraction and the forced hibernation, if you may, has given people some time to reflect, and particularly patriarchs who are above their 60s and in their 70s, to start thinking of, do I want to be in this race when I have, very able support within the family to take on things? So they've got the time. They would want to do other things, social causes, charitable causes, so on and so forth. And they're also seeing firsthand the vagaries of business, in that, business fluctuation can really reach into their business assets, and sort of have lenders get a lien on their private assets, so on and so forth. And therefore succession planning in the COVID times, when people have had more time, have had time to reflect, want to shift into different things, are worried about the separation of private wealth from business assets. In India, it has all been intertwined. There's not been that difference. And lastly, with COVID and the fall in government revenues, the real fear and risk of inheritance tax, which can be, in its previous avatar, it was close to 50% tax. So the promoters are realizing that one will have to sell half the business to pay the tax, because cash is not really lying around. So all of this has brought succession planning and intergenerational movements to the fore. And they're also thinking of cross-border, and we have not picked it up here, but dual nationalities. Can we go into Europe? Can we move? Can we have a reach to the pump today?
Thank you. And Jan, you mentioned in your session the Sharia aspects of this. I'm always distressed when I hear people talking about using structures to avoid the provisions of Sharia, because for me, that's really not what it's about. It's about making sure that you use the things that are available to you in the right way within the context of that. What's your experience?
Yeah, I think it's not about avoiding Sharia. It's about working within the spirit of the law of the land to consolidate assets and prevent dilution, because often dilution triggers lack of control, triggers destruction of value. And what do family want is to increase value over time, keep on generating, because these families are growing. Their historical business at some stage will be sold or will be insufficient to cover enough generation of value over time to cater for the needs of a family. It is estimated that a pool of assets needs to generate about 13 to 15% today in the Gulf, net of taxes, to cater for the needs of a large family. That's a lot of money. You better have a very good investment advisor. Now, if something happens to the patriarch, if there's discontinuation in the business, even temporary, that cuts that flow. So within that, the idea for many people is to say, I am a Muslim. I want to consolidate my assets. I want them to be safe kept from one generation to the other. I want my family and my up-to-come family to keep on generating, but let's put some sort of framework around it, family governance, an infrastructure, so that it does not depend on 1 or 2, 3 people holding that in their own name, which expose that to risk, death, divorce, creditor attacks, but it stays in the family, managed by the family, and going by the will of the patriarch and whatever his beliefs are. And if his beliefs are, I want to put that on a structure and I want this to be held completely independently, but I want every contributing member to benefit equally, this is fine. This is acceptable. What would not be acceptable is to have these assets fall into a pool at succession and then trying at the death of the patriarch to do something different. That would be Sharia non-compliant. But if you do it early enough and you keep on controlling that in the family, then no problem at all. And this is what both ADGM is satisfied with and the local Muslim authorities. So we are really up to something here, because what COVID has done is transform theoretical risk, or at least perceived theoretical by many entrepreneurs, into real time. Cash flow getting lower, brick and mortar business crumbling, and people passing away or being incapacitated. Proper structuring helps to mitigate that risk or to remove it altogether.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we've hit the hour mark. I'm going to ask for a nod around the table that we maybe cover just one more question after we round this one out. Everybody okay with that? Yeah, I'm assuming that everybody's nodded. Jan used the expression "outstanding investment advisors," so I thought it was a good time to come to you and to see what you're seeing in terms of our local families as well. Has this trend that Chandi and Jan talked about it hit now? Are we seeing more of our local families starting to really push forward now with formal family office structures?
Ismail, this is for you. Huh?
I was giving it to Mark, but I think...
Yeah.
Sorry, kind of froze out there. The answer is yes, absolutely. The reality is that we've had a large number of incoming inquiries, particularly during this time of period, around succession planning, and how that can be accomplished within the UAE and the GCC, specifically with regards to Sharia concerns. And I think this time is a time where initially I think folks were very busy getting organized, and now probably they have a little bit more time on their hands to think about longer term implications about the time frame that we've just come through. So I hope that adequately addresses the question.
Yeah, and it's very consistent with what we're seeing as well. Ismail, I wanted to come to you, perhaps if you take the lead on my final question, and it's something that's come up in several different ways in a number of questions we've seen coming through. And particularly Khushbu asked the question about whether there are mandatory roles for family office entities in ADGM, or are they just gifted assets with no shareholders as a management office? And my perspective on this is that it can be many different things, but I wanted to hear what your perspective on it was, because it probably brings all this back together.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you can see Mr. Mrazek, doing this because he believes that it's the perfect moment to connect the foundation with the family office. And I think this question that I think the lady's name is Khushbu has raised is perfect to do that. So where does the foundation and the family office connect? And answering differently, what a typical family office, looks like from a legal perspective, right? So typically, a typical family office would not be incorporated as a foundation or as a trust. It would be incorporated as a company, an LLC, an LTD, right? And one thing that no one has mentioned so far, but which is absolutely great about ADGM, is that there is no minimum share capital to incorporate the family office, and there is no minimum threshold of assets under management. While a lot of other places around the world are not as kind and flexible and generous, let's say. They would typically say, I think below $10 million of liquid assets, it's do not even think about it. And minimum share capital might be $50,000, $100,000, depending on the jurisdiction, $30,000. ADGM is very flexible from that perspective. So the family office, at least a single family office, remember my presentation, or multi-family office, would typically take the shape of a corporation. Okay, now it can be a cost center, it can be a profit center. That depends on how the activities of the family office, how its menu of services is developed, and ultimately whether they cater the needs of one family, a group of families who are friends with each other, which typically would mean cost center most of the time, or whether it's a multi-family office with a commercial intent. Okay, typically we see family office that do not own assets. The majority of single family offices would not own directly assets, although there are exceptions to that. But the majority of single family offices would not own assets directly. They would rather act as a management company or an advisory company that would provide services to a structure that owns the assets. And there are many reasons for that, but I'll stick to the most important one probably. A corporation, in most instances, and particularly for the reason that Jan mentioned about asset protection and succession planning, a company is not the best vehicle to plan your succession. Because when you die and you're the sole shareholder in a company, these shares get split. And if you haven't done, let's say, a comprehensive succession planning exercise, discussing with the family, what's going to happen, get them ready, it's usually a recipe for disaster. And so, therefore, the family office as a corporation providing services to a structure, that structure, you want the best structure to achieve the objectives of the family, succession planning, asset protection, maybe tax planning, as Katie mentioned. And that's where the foundation or the trust, but let's stick to the foundation, particularly in the context of regional assets, comes very handy as, and I'm very comfortable saying this, as today the best vehicle that exists to own regional assets in a way that meet the family objective, succession planning, asset protection, and the overarching objective of preserving the unity and the harmony of the family.
That's fantastic, and I'm conscious that we've run over, and I'm also conscious that all of my panelists would like to jump onto this one and make a comment. I'm going to draw it to a close. We've got an amazing group of panelists today that could do this in 3 or 4 hours, and I'm sure would be willing to. I'm going to close with one thing apart from just my thanks to my panelists, because I think this has been one of our most insightful sessions, and I'm very grateful to everybody for their insights. There was one question that came through that asked, or several questions actually, around whether we have technical details of how ADGM compares to other jurisdictions. And I note that Jan has offered up their comparison of the various different structures that are available in the various different locations. It's available on the MHQ website. I'm sure there are others out there, but please feel free to go and find that one. We'll try and post this one into the LinkedIn stream as well, so that you've got a link to that. Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate your support. Thanks to Jan, thanks to Chandi, thanks to Alain, thanks to Mark, and thanks to Ismail. Hope everybody's enjoyed it, and I look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Gary.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Bye, Steve.